Terrific. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm John Evangelakos, the president of Harvard Alumni for Free Speech. We are an independent, nonpartisan, and nonprofit group of alumni dedicated to protecting and promoting free speech, academic freedom, and viewpoint diversity throughout the Harvard community. Today is June 17, 2026, and I'm very excited to welcome all of you to a conversation with Tarek Masoud. Tarek is the Ford Foundation Professor of Democracy and Governance at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, the faculty director of the Kennedy School's Middle East Initiative and the Initiative on Democracy in Hard Places, a co-president of the Council on Academic Freedom at Harvard, and he's also the convener of the Middle East Dialogues, which is the subject of our program today. The Middle East Dialogues is a series of in-depth conversations with leading scholars, intellectuals, and public servants that expose Harvard students, the Harvard community more broadly, and the public to varied and vital perspectives on the region, the transformation and turmoil underway there, and the prospects for peace and prosperity. To give you a sense of the extraordinary range of views that have been discussed in the series, Tarek's guest list has included Ehud Olmert, the former Prime Minister of Israel, Jared Kushner, Middle East advisor to President Trump, Salam Fayyad, former Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, and Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia. It's a truly remarkable series of programs that brings a lot of information, varied perspective, and a great deal of nuance to the discussion. The dialogues exemplify for me the kind of informed, respectful, civil discourse that Harvard should be offering, and from my ancient perspective, was offering when I attended Harvard way back in what now feels like prehistory. So Tarek, let's talk about what you're doing with the Middle East Dialogues and its implications for open dialogue and civil discourse at Harvard and elsewhere.
Well, thank you so much, John, for having me. If I might quibble with one thing, we had actually invited Prince Faisal bin Farhan, and we had agreed, and he was going to come, and then his visit was postponed at the last minute because of the Israeli airstrike in Qatar. And so he is one of the one on that list that we haven't yet had a chance to sit down with, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to do that in the future. But thank you so much, John, for inviting me to this. And I am an incredible fan of what the Harvard Alumni for Free Speech are doing. One of the things that makes me a little bit annoyed when people talk about Harvard these days and Harvard's really earnest attempts at reform is they attribute Harvard's attempts at reform to pressure from the president and the present administration. And the argument I always try to make is that, no, there were a lot of pressures for reform from within the Harvard community and within the Harvard family, and HAFFS is an example of that. And in fact, is also an indication, I think, of the fundamental health of the institution and its community that would give rise to these kinds of movements and organizations. So you're doing really the Lord's work, and I'm very grateful to you.
Well, thank you. And look, we started Harvard Alumni for Free Speech before there was political pressure from Washington, and I can tell you there was a lot of pressure from alumni, and I know from faculty, because the faculty organized the Council on Academic Freedom back when that was not popular. And I know that there are people like you who are in the trenches fighting the good fight and making a lot of progress quietly behind the scenes. So thank you, Tarek, and all your colleagues. And I really admire the work that the council is doing. But I think let's talk about the Middle East Dialogues, because we not too much of this self-congratulations here. But let's talk about how you what your idea is, how you started the program.
Sure.
And I think it was in the aftermath of October 7th, and give our people some perspective.
Sure. So as you pointed out, the Middle East Dialogues is a series of conversations that I've been having with people on this conflict and increasingly the broader conflicts in the Middle East. And It started, as you correctly note, right after October 7th, but in a slightly different form. I didn't start with the Middle East dialogues. I started with just convening some panels about what had happened in southern Israel at the hands of Hamas, where Hamas killed 1,200 Israelis, including about 900 civilians. And those first attempts to convene rigorous conversation about this conflict, in part came about because my dean at the time, Professor Douglas Elmendorf, economist, a very noted public servant, after October 7th, I think the next day, emailed me and said, "What are you going to do to educate our community about this?" So I took that as a charge to step up and try to create some opportunities to generate light where we had had only heat. And so the first event that we did at the Kennedy School that Dean Elmendorf actually opened up was a forum that we did in the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. We had an audience of about 1,000 people, many multiples of that online, where I had a very serious Israeli academic named Shai Feldman, a very serious a Palestinian American academic named Shibli Talhami, and a distinguished American diplomat, Edward Jurigian, who had been our ambassador to Israel. And so that happened on October 13th. I think it was one of the only positive notices that Harvard got in that week, because the conversation was deemed by most people to be fairly enlightening, rigorous, and empathetic. Really ticked off a number of virtues, and so I was encouraged after that, and I did a few more such things, and then I read this op-ed in November by a student of ours. And the op-ed, I'm going to get the title wrong, but it basically said something like, "Harvard is not educating me about Israel-Palestine. Everybody around here talks about it in hushed tones. There are no opportunities for me to learn about it." And my thought was, well, wait a minute, what have I been doing? Like, I thought I'd been convening these opportunities. Clearly, it's not enough. And then subsequent to that, I think it was subsequent to that, I may have the timeline slightly off, I went to a viewing of the video of Hamas atrocities against Israeli civilians on October 7th. And that was brought here by Harvard alumnus who everybody knows, Bill Ackman. And, I was just, I watched it. And then afterwards, Bill and the Israeli IDF spokesperson who had brought the video here, who, by the way, was a former student of mine, had like a little fireside chat. And somebody asked Bill Ackman, "How do you think Harvard is doing?" And in terms of fulfilling its educational mission around Israel-Palestine. And Bill Ackman said, "Where are the panels? Where are the academic discussions? Why isn't this happening?" And I thought, wait a minute, I thought I was doing those things. So I really need to, amp this up. And so those two things, combined with an unease that I had had at the end of every single one of the panels that I convened, which was that I didn't feel like we got to really dive into the issues. Like, so-and-so said something, but they only had 4 minutes to speak. And then we moved on to thus and such, and that other person said their thing, and we forgot about what so-and-so said. And so I said, what I really want to do is I want to have one-on-one conversations where I can go as deep as possible. And so that's what I tried to do. The first person I invited was Jared Kushner. And, I put together what I thought in that first year was a very carefully curated list of people from across the spectrum. And then we were off to the races. It makes it sound positive, but it wasn't entirely in the beginning. But that's sort of how the Middle East dialogues came about.
Well, that's terrific. And throughout the period, it sounds like your dean was supportive, at least at the start. How has Harvard been? Because I know you've had a number of controversial guests. Maybe you could sort of, tell us how what the reactions have been.
Yeah, 100%. When I first announced the Middle East dialogues, I was very careful that we have the full lineup before we announced anything, because I wanted to make sure that when people got the announcement, they saw that there was a very broad spectrum of people. In fact, I remember I told my team that I didn't even want us to produce any posters that just had the image of that week's speaker. I wanted every poster to have all the images of the speakers because I want people to know that we are not just doing this view or platforming that view. We are really trying to wrap our arms around the entirety of the problem and listen to all of the most important perspectives. I thought that the most heat I was going to get was because of Jared Kushner. It shouldn't be a surprise to you that Harvard is generally a fairly progressive institution, and the first Trump administration was not a period that most people here looked on favorably. And Jared Kushner was certainly not somebody that people were inclined to think of as somebody worthy of being platformed at Harvard. And I remember when we first announced the series, that was the pushback I got from colleagues about Jared Kushner. Some colleagues saying, that somebody asked me, what did I possibly think Jared Kushner had to teach us? And I responded, well, I studied the Middle East. He was the architect of the Abraham Accords. That's a pretty major development in my part of the world that I cover. And so, yeah, I think he's consequential enough to merit talking to me. And, other people, criticized me for lacking political savvy, et cetera. And so I thought that was really where the heat was going to come from. I was surprised to find that, in fact, the majority of the pushback came from due to one of the speakers who's a Palestinian professor from the Arab American University in Ramallah. Her name is Dalal Saib Arakat, and she is the daughter of a gentleman who was the chief Palestinian negotiator and, in fact, had been a fellow at Harvard with Nick Burns, who was my predecessor as the director of the Middle East Initiative and then went on to become our ambassador to China. So she had some connections with our institution. It turned out that people, when they saw her name, they just dug up what had she been saying on Twitter on October 7th, which is something I hadn't done. And it turned out that on October 7th, she tweeted that this is a normal struggle for freedom, that the Israelis have kept the Palestinians under siege, and so nobody should be surprised that the Palestinians are doing this. She questioned the narrative of sexual assaults that were committed against Israelis on October 7th. And she even dealt in some conspiracy theorizing about how many of the deaths of Israelis were actually not at the hands of Hamas, but were at the hands of Israelis. And so these were all things that she had tweeted. They were all things that I was not aware of when she tweeted them. And I said very publicly that if I had known about these things beforehand, there isn't a way that I would have invited her. I mean, I'm not stupid. And, my view is I want to try as much as possible to maximize the ratio of light to heat. And starting off with somebody who's peppering us with hot takes about some of the most egregious crimes that any of us has ever seen is not the way to maximize the ratio of light to heat. However, I had already invited her. She was, and so it seemed to me that a disinvitation is a very different thing from a decision not to invite in the first place. And so what I needed to ascertain was how widespread are her views in Palestine and among Palestinians? Because if they are widely shared and widely shared by important people, then it behooves us to continue on course and actually interrogate those views, because those views, if they're held by a lot of people, including a lot of decision makers in the Palestinian sector, then that is a important obstacle, potential obstacle to coexistence, peace, etc. So I need to understand that. So that's the first thing I did is I just did a lot of research on what were other Palestinian leaders who people generally respect saying. So I looked at Hanan Ashrawi's Twitter. Hanan Ashrawi, liberal Palestinian legislator, was, very prominent in the U.S. in U.S. circles on
Mhm.
Palestine in the 90s and the early 2000s. Interestingly, by the way, she'd been a former girlfriend of Peter Jennings, and she had been saying very similar things. I
Mhm.
looked at Mustafa Barghouti, who is a Palestinian physician and human rights activist, and he was interviewed on Fareed Zakaria's program, saying similar things. And then I had a conversation with Dalal, and she pointed out that Tarek, a lot of these tweets that people are pointing to were very early on October 7th when nobody really knew what was going
Mhm.
on. And I do believe, by the way, and this is a totally different thing, but we could talk about it some other point. I
Yeah.
do think that Palestinians and Arabs in general were inhabiting a very different media environment than we were. So
Mhm.
they were seeing images that Hamas wanted to share, and those tended to be images of Hamas penetrating Israeli military installations. So, and I do think that a video of a Palestinian militia penetrating a military installation is different morally from
Mhm.
video of them slaughtering women and children and innocent people. So I think for many people that was also part of the complicating factor. And so my conclusion was this is widely shared set of views. I think they're wrong, but they're there in the world. We might as well take this opportunity to subject them to rigorous inquiry and to
Mhm.
expose our students to the thinking that is behind this. And so I declined to disinvite
Mhm.
Professor Ericott. And, it was definitely not the most lauded decision I've ever made. But I,
Mhm.
I had confidence that if we were able to do the event, people would see that I'm going to ask hard questions, that my students are going to ask hard questions. We're not going to like platform anything. We're going to question things. And I think people will be pleasantly surprised by how this turns out. The problem was that I announced everybody at the same time, but her event wasn't until March. And
Mhm.
so from when I announced the series in January
Right.
until her event, I was really, I was suffering because this thing was on the horizon. Nobody wanted it to happen,
Right.
and I was anxious about it.
Yeah.
The first event, by the way, was the Jared Kushner event,
Mhm.
and interestingly, when that went okay, some of the heat also died down a little bit to make it possible for me to
Mhm.
like pick my head up off the pillow every morning and go into work. But it was definitely it
Yeah.
was definitely tense.
No, no, I'm sure it was. So let's use that as because I want to get sort of more into the what the objectives, what you're actually trying to get to, aside from a pure intellectual perspective. I think I mean, it's a matter of, I think I've read somewhere you're trying to actually instill a sense of empathy or perhaps perspective, getting people to understand, what others are thinking. And I think you're also, I guess, trying to get people to think in a kind of a more cerebral, less visceral way about some of these issues. Was it in fact part of your goal, and how do you feel? Have you achieved that? I mean, you've been going, this is a lot of great programming over 2 years. So, like sort of tell us what you found and
Yeah.
how you think that's going.
You're absolutely right that a big part of the enterprise was uh, to help people, to model for people how we can have these
Mhm.
difficult conversations about difficult issues, how we can, how understanding the perspective of the other side doesn't do violence to us. It doesn't make us weaker. It doesn't, only makes us stronger and smarter and more capable of acting in the world. And I know the line you're quoting where I said, where I'm trying to get a thing that people experience viscerally and get them to experience it cerebrally. Um, I will say though that, all of those formulations of mine make me seem much more heroic and as somebody who had a much harder job than I actually thought I had. Because in the back of my mind, John, I was like, look, I know these students. I've been teaching here for 18 years. Our students are okay. Like there are definitely some people who want to shut down discourse. And, when the encampments were happening, there was a bunch of kids who threw me out of the yard. But the vast majority of our students are very, I would say, earnest seekers of truth. I really believe that about our students. And it has just been my experience. And I don't think it's even selection that, oh no, Tarek, you only get the ones who want to, like the students I even meet randomly, et cetera. Like we have a very good student body. So I did feel that I had some confidence that it's all going to be fine. Like people are freaking out, but it's going to be fine because I know our students. And by the way, I know myself. Like I'm not going to let people get away with saying incendiary things. I'm going to ask hard questions, but I'm also going to do it in a way that keeps things on an even keel, keeps things from getting out of hand. So I definitely think I had a slightly easier job than I make it out to be, and it was easier because we have a fundamentally, I think, sound community. However, yes, getting people to empathize, getting people to think as opposed to just feel was also important. I don't know how successful I've been on either. One of the things I think I've discovered is that it's much easier to get people to be civil towards views that they don't respect than to empathize with the holders of those views. So, that's just something I've experienced. Also, frankly, the format of my series, which is really a back and forth genial sparring between me and my interlocutor. I don't know if it's designed really or optimized really for creating empathy. So I don't know that I've succeeded there. And I actually want to, now your question is making me think, like, how would I even test that people are empathizing? The cerebral versus visceral thing is a great line that I came up with, but also, like, I sometimes cringe that I said it because it almost sounds like I'm saying this. Hey, y'all need to control your emotions. Let me show you how you Palestinian or you Israeli or you sympathizer with either side, just control your emotion and show up and smile and have a conversation. For a lot of people, it's hard. It's hard to do that. And people might even say, Tarek, it's easier for you to do this on this issue because you are not a party to the issue. I'm not a Palestinian. I'm not an Israeli. I am able to approach this with some intellectual distance. So I kind of take that on board. The only thing I will say, and then I'll let you ask questions, is just, there's two approaches really at Harvard to what we call civil discourse now. The dominant approach is how do we teach our students to talk in ways that don't alienate their interlocutor or don't create a visceral reaction in their interlocutor such that they shut down. And I think that's important, by the way. I think that's important. What I'm doing is very different. The philosophy that I come to, and I actually co-taught a course on Israel-Palestine based on this philosophy, is that I can't really do a whole lot to control your emotions. That's your business. I can control mine. So if somebody says I'm an idiot, or if somebody says that I am being awfully cavalier about this or that, I can control how I react to that such that I remain focused on the conversation. I don't lose my cool. I don't find myself in a state of such high emotion that I'm not able to do what I came to do. And so that's what I've been trying to emphasize and to model. Yeah. And so I almost love it, for example, when an interlocutor of mine makes fun of me and then I just let it go, or I laugh because I think I'm modeling for people. Okay, like somebody's going to try to knock you off your game. Here's what you do. Yeah. Sorry, it's a long answer.
That's great. I had two very different questions from kind of from that. Let me the more direct one, because one I think it goes off. It's sort of funny because when I read empathize, and having watched your program, I didn't think it was really one of empathy. And I don't think in terms of trying to teach civil discourse, it's not really a matter of empathy, as you say, because it's hard to control emotions. I think it's a matter of at least understanding. You don't have to buy into somebody. You don't have to feel, you don't have to feel, but I think it helps you in terms of how you think of what you're trying to achieve by understanding what is my counterpart thinking? What is my
Yes.
counterpart trying to get out of this process? Because maybe it's something I can accommodate, in which case, we have a big fuss about nothing, or maybe it's more fundamental that I even understand, or what. Anyway, so that was kind of my reaction to
Yeah.
I would say it a little bit differently,
Yeah.
um, but let me actually get to my other question, which is something you said, which isn't related to the dialogues per se. It's your confidence about the student body as a whole, and I'm not disagreeing with that. I just would like it's sort of an understanding of, given everything we've kind of been reading and hearing about Harvard and self-censorship and the various issues, if the vast majority, or I said you didn't say vast majority, if the majority of the students are open, want to have these discussions, and I'm not disagreeing with that because the ones I've talked to by and large are all open to that, what's the problem? What's holding them back?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. So I actually want to take both of the questions, but let me answer the second one first. I'm gonna lean out over my skis and say the vast majority of our students are open and interested. And so then the question is, okay, Tarek, like what went wrong? We weren't imagining the things that we saw on campus, the things that we read in the anti-Semitism report and in the Islamophobia report, like those things happen. So what is going on? I really do think, number one, that the drivers of the decay of the culture of discourse on campus are really a small minority of people. And I really do think the vast majority of our students want to come, they want to learn, they want to discuss, et cetera. But we know how small groups of people with highly intense preferences can dominate over a large dispersed groups of people who don't have such intense preferences. Okay, so John is really agitated about issue X. I have questions about issue X, but it's not worth triggering John, so I'll just keep my mouth shut. And so I really do think that's a big part of it. I also think that at an earlier period of this university's history, we were a little bit relaxed when it came to the enforcement of the rules that make free speech possible. And so, there's a great book by Bart Giamatti, who's the father of the actor Paul Giamatti, who was president of Yale, and I think he was president of American baseball. Um, and it was called like the university, a free and ordered place, or free and ordered space. Sorry. And the basic idea, of that phrase at least, is that, you know, academic freedom is essential to the university, but academic freedom doesn't just emerge. It actually has to be enforced. There are rules that make our freedom possible. And so, for example, if John is going to speak and Tarek doesn't like what John is going to say, well, Tarek has the freedom to criticize what John says, but not while John is talking. I can't show up with a banner and hide you from people and have them just talk, because then I'm violating your academic freedom. And so the university needs to limit me so that you can experience freedom. Somehow things got inverted, and the protester was the one whose freedom was being protected. And I had an experience where this happened for a panel that I convened, and so I think there was a little bit of a reluctance on the part of the university to enforce some of these rules. And by the way, totally understandably, because we're also living in an environment now where everything that happens on this campus is broadcast to the world. And so let's say I'm Harvard University Police and, I need to clear some really disruptive protesters so that an event can proceed. Well, that's going to make an awfully great viral video.
Mhm.
And so I am deeply empathetic, sympathetic, whatever the right word is, with the leadership of the university who are trying to navigate a really tough time. Okay.
Mhm.
But I think part of what we need to do, particularly as faculty, is like embolden, encourage the university leadership to actually enforce our rules. And if you go now on the provost webpage and you look at the Declaration of University-wide Statement on Rights and Responsibilities, I think of it as very much an operationalization of that idea of the free and ordered space that Giamatti talked about. So I feel like we're going in the right direction, but this combination of very loud, intense, small groups of people with an administration that was understandably reluctant to feed a media beast that is hungry for news of discontent and noise and disruption at Harvard. So those are the two drivers, I think, of why we ended up in this place.
Okay. So it should be easy to fix then.
So easy, not easy, but straightforward in terms of knowing what we have
Better
to do.
word.
The things we have to do are hard, but knowing
Right.
what we have to do. So for example, I have I've never protested anything in my life. I've always been somebody who accommodates themselves to leadership structures, which might come as a surprise to some deans who've dealt with me, who think of me as a disagreeable guy. But I really am a company man in many ways. I actually respect our students who protest. I actually respect them. I think, well, that's a thing I've never done. I never would do. And it's hard. You bear costs for protesting, right? And I respect you for bearing those costs. But you need to bear the costs. So, the students who did the encampment, I understand where they were coming from and the deep anguish at the suffering in Gaza that led them to do that. Okay, fine. But if I'm the president of the university, I'm going to, give you an ultimatum that you have to leave the yard, and then I'm going to give you a bill for the damage to the yard, because I cannot have a university where there is free and open inquiry if I'm not willing to apply our rules. Because if people can occupy space for this cause and shout people down for this cause, they're going to do it for that cause. And that's not what we do at a university. We don't occupy space. We don't shut people down. So in any case, I do feel like we are moving in that direction. Again, look at the initiatives that the leadership of the university has been engaging in. There's also all the other stuff that the university is doing on intellectual vitality and candid and constructive conversations, et cetera, which are very important as well. But I think also just enforcing our rules around discourse has had a very positive and immediate effect.
So look, at this point, and I think it's in part my fault here, we've diverged in kind of two different directions, both fairly interesting. We can go back to the Middle East dialogues, fascinating. We can continue with the discussion of reforms at Harvard. You're the guest, so I'll give you I'll let
Let's
you
do
decide.
let's do half. Let's do a little bit more Middle East
Okay.
dialogues. You can ask me about my most embarrassing moments or something, and then we could talk a little bit more about the
Well, that's a
university.
great cue because you must have. Actually, I'll give you a choice here. You're not a choice. You do both. Give it both your greatest triumph and your biggest embarrassment.
Look, I don't know that I've had any great triumphs. I really enjoyed very much my conversation with Ehud Olmert,
Mhm.
who's a very dovish former Israeli prime minister, just also a very appealing person. Um, and he had spent some time in prison on corruption charges, and there's even a little funny exchange about that in our interview, because I was reluctant to mention it because I didn't want to embarrass him, and he just named it. And he said, "I know you don't want to embarrass me. I went to jail," and I was like, "Oh." I also benefited a great deal. I have to be careful as I say this, but I really did value the conversation I had with Alan Dershowitz.
Mhm.
That's not to downplay his adjacency or involvement in some in the Epstein affair and some other things
Mhm.
that people point to. That's not my job to adjudicate those things. And I certainly wouldn't want people to think that my inviting him was somehow a declaration that those things didn't matter. But my view about Alan was Professor Dershowitz was saying very vocally that he was banned from speaking at Harvard. And
Mhm.
I think he wasn't formally banned, of course, but it was the case that nobody was really inviting him to speak. And I said, well, he's not banned from my forum, so sure, let's talk. And he certainly didn't make my life easy. Despite the dilemmas around that, I was happy that we did it. Biggest embarrassments. Honestly, I have to say, with my interview with Jared Kushner, after the interview, people circulated a snippet of the interview. It was actually kind of clips that they put together that made it sound like Jared Kushner was saying, Palestine's great waterfront property. We should move the Palestinians into the Negev desert and develop that waterfront property. And that isn't what he said.
Mhm.
What he said was, the Egyptians should take the Palestinians while Israel does its operation in Gaza. And I said, there's no way the Egyptians are going to do that because they're afraid that if the Palestinians leave Gaza, they're not going to be let back in. And then Jared Kushner said, okay, then the Palestinians should be given refuge in the Negev while Israel clears this up. And then nobody's saying they can't go back. That's what he said.
Mhm.
However, he also did say at a different point, he's like, what is Gaza? Borders changed during war. Gaza wasn't really a thing before. Like, he said enough things that could
Mhm.
cause a reasonable person to think that no, Jared Kushner is kind of okay with Israel taking over Gaza, etc. And I at the time knew that.
Mhm.
But when he said that sentence, nobody's saying that the Palestinians can't go back. I made a decision like, I've got a whole bunch of questions to get through. Let me move on. And so I
Mhm.
said something like, well, there's a lot of threads to pull on there, but let's keep going. And
Mhm.
it lives on the internet, and all kinds of people say Tarek Masoud just sat there like a lump on a log while Jared Kushner advocated for ethnic cleansing. My response is Jared Kushner didn't advocate for ethnic cleansing. He did, however, say some things that I should have really
Mhm.
interrogated, and I kind of let it go. And that, by the way, happens a lot in this series. Can I tell another story about Kushner?
Sure.
Very quickly.
Yeah,
Um,
quick story.
during the interview, there was a protest. So a bunch of students stood up with a banner that was calling him a genocide heir or a nepo baby. I can't remember what it was. And you can only like if you watch the video very carefully, you can tell when they stand up because Jared says like, "Here we go." He says something like that, and I just was like, "No, focus on me." And Jared was talking during that time, and if there wasn't video, I would not be able to tell you what he said
Mhm.
because the entirety of my limited mental apparatus was focused on these protesters. And I was thinking, like, okay, what if they escalate? What am I going to do? Oh, there's a script I'm supposed to read. Like, oh, I didn't
Mhm.
memorize it. And they were very respectful. They stood
Mhm.
up with, aside from the mean things that were on their banners, they stood up with the things for 10 minutes. They put them down and they left. And I was like, oh, that was nice.
Yeah.
But the point is, sometimes I think I let things go, in part because my attention is on the room and things that are bubbling up in the room, as opposed to what the person is saying.
Yeah, well, it's always a difficult balance to decide when to intervene and when to let things play out, right? It's so you got to rely on your gut and your intuition, I think, but it's worked out here, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, so actually, let me just follow up on that on something on kind of you. You're, you have a friendly demeanor. You try to keep it, engage with people who I know you don't necessarily agree with. In some cases, you disagree with strongly. But how do you find what kind of balance? How do you find that balance? How do you draw that balance? And when do you find when is there do you find attention sometimes, or are you just it just sort of flows naturally to you?
I am kind of constitutionally incapable of being rude to somebody. So it's hard for me not to be genial and friendly, particularly when I've invited the person, they have agreed. And look, I will also say, like some of these people, when the controversy the first year came out about the Palestinian speaker, one of my concerns was that, other speakers that I have in the series are now going to pull out because they don't want to be part of this. And I would write to people and ask them, like, please don't withdraw. And all of them, to a person, was like, what are you talking about? We have no intention of withdrawing. But that means when they came, I actually had a feeling of gratitude because they could have really made my life much worse. I would have had to stop the series if I can't get guests. And in fact, in that first year, when I started inviting additional guests, I would always lead with, FYI, you need to know there's a huge controversy about the thing that I'm doing. I hope you'll look past it. And they did. So that also made me feel a sense of obligation. So look, I have two personality traits that I think define me. I'm deathly afraid of people thinking that I'm dumb. And I suspect that I am dumb. So I spend a lot of my time like, and I want people to like me. And so those two things mean I should try to really ask the smartest question that I can in the nicest way possible. To be a little bit more serious also, I think, I've never had a problem with being self-deprecating. I think it puts people at ease. And so I lean heavily into self-deprecation. I kind of like it, in fact, when, somebody makes fun of me. Because again, like I think I said this already, like it allows me to model, like, that's cool. We can deal with this. But it is a challenge. I guess it should be a challenge. I don't, in other words, being polite to people with whom you disagree viscerally should be a challenge. The fact that I don't find it a challenge sometimes makes me think I'm missing a chromosome or something. But I also, when I show up at these things, I am incredibly excited to like understand what this person thinks. I've read things they said, and I'm like, I want to know how you came to this view because I don't understand it. So all of that is what is operating at the time when I'm in the interview, and it's why maybe you observe me being not just polite, but sometimes like really into it and excited about what I'm hearing, even though I disagree with the person.
Well, curiosity, I think, is an important trait. I think it's one that we as a society could, be great if we had more curiosity. Let me actually probe a little bit further on something that you said here. It's sort of in a different way. Are there limits? I mean, who would you not invite? Are there people who you'd say, okay, I know they have a perspective, but I just can't listen to them, right? I mean, I just refuse to. Is there a wall? Do you have a wall? Should people have walls? I mean, what's your perspective on that?
So the question for the relevant formulation of that question for me is, what is the decision rule, or what's the line that makes somebody worthy of being invited to Harvard or not invited to Harvard? Like, because that's what I'm doing. I'm not just like listening to people and talking to them. I am using my position as a Harvard faculty member, which was given to me in trust by the university, and I'm inviting people to this university. And even though we all say, look, I'm just inviting them to give a talk and we're going to subject them to rigorous inquiry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I'm not honoring them. No, anybody who comes to Harvard puts on their social media, I was invited to Harvard. So this is a very precious thing that I have been given some access to, an invitation to Harvard. And so what is the line that I apply? And so actually the line that I apply is, you might be surprised to hear this, is actually a pretty high bar. So for example, I would not have invited that Palestinian speaker, Dr. Dalal, who has since, we've become friendly, but I wouldn't have invited her if I'd seen those tweets. Because again, like I do have a responsibility to the community. Like, can I find somebody who articulates a strong nationalist Palestinian perspective, who didn't just share a bunch of hot tweets about one of the greatest crimes in recent memory, I'm sure I
Mhm.
could find such a person.
Mhm.
So definitely, like I am not an absolutist and like everybody must hear, etc. No, I try to be cautious and careful. Um, you know, what is the line? When you look at that description of the Middle East dialogues, I said vital and varied perspectives.
Mhm.
And there's a reason I use that language, aside from the iterative nature of it. Vital was a way of me saying like important. Okay,
Mhm.
like important in that they are widely shared, they influence decision makers who are relevant to the outcome of this conflict. So if, for example, when I told you the story about Dalal Arakat and her views, the first thing I want to do is like, are her views vital?
Mhm.
Do are these widely shared, or am I just bringing somebody who has a set of fringe views? If they're a set of fringe views, consign it to the ash heap of history. I'm not going to dignify it with a Harvard platform, but
Mhm.
it's just evident that this is a widely shared set of views, and what we need to do is interrogate them. When there was the biggest pushback, and there was a lot in Israel, a lot of pushback in Israel. There's a student who ended up later becoming a student of mine. He wasn't at that time a student of mine, or actually, had he been? I can't remember. Maybe he had been a student of mine. But, he wrote in the Israeli press, this is what I came to Harvard for. I came to Harvard for these conversations. We just had 30 odd student groups say Israel is to blame for all the unfolding violence. Okay. That, in my view, is an incorrect view. Okay.
Mhm.
Israel's to blame for some of the violence, but like Hamas doesn't get blamed for the violence. What are we talking about here?
Mhm.
And so when people, so my view is like that view is here. That view is
Mhm.
here. And we as faculty never did our job of taking the students aside and saying, like, so tell me why you have this view, and like instructing them in why such a view is reductionist, simplistic. And by the
Mhm.
way, I did say this to some students, like, I'm sorry, you don't like, you're an undergraduate. You don't get up and start hurling thunderbolts when something like this has happened. Like the first thing to do, listen, learn,
Mhm.
approach this with empathy, sympathy, etc. So my point is that, my feeling was that by bringing this speaker here and in having the conversation with her, where I was unfailingly polite and generous, that was our opportunity finally to like put our arms around those students who had that view and be like, okay, we're going to interrogate this now.
Mhm.
And so I forgot, John, the question that I was answering, but I hope I answered it.
No, no, I think that you did because I was wondering where you would draw the line,
Right,
and I
right,
sort of
right. So
appreciate that. So
yeah. So if there is if there is light to be gained from it, we will do it. But for example, would I bring a speaker whose brand is, we need violence against the Israelis, or I want to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians? Like, no, I'm not. I'm not going to do that. Would I host somebody like Hassan Piker who's
Mhm.
talking about looting shops as a democratic responsibility? Maybe, but I would really push them on it.
Well, this is where kind of I have in mind, and
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is. I don't
Yeah.
know what the right answer is.
Yeah. What am I
If you
getting
could,
wrong? Yeah.
no, no, I don't. It's not right or wrong, right? But if you could find the current leader of Hamas and if you could get him on your show, right? Is that certainly vital, certainly relevant? Would that be someone that you would talk with?
I would not bring them to campus. I mean,
No, 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 you can't. Let's
I
wherever.
couldn't do that.
Yeah,
Couldn't
yeah.
do that. Um, if I had an opportunity to speak with the political leader of Hamas
Mhm.
and to have students question the political leader of Hamas in like a webinar or something like that,
Mhm.
um, you know, certainly would be hard to, that's a hard decision because I think on the one hand, the opportunity, like imagine if I could have one of my Israeli students ask a trenchant question to the leader of Hamas that lays bare that all of this talk of fighting for freedom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all sits alongside a deeply ingrained anti-Semitism. Like
Mhm.
that, I think is an educational opportunity, and you have to weigh that against the potential rupture in the community
Mhm.
over having that person.
Yeah.
And, you have to, how can I be sure that nobody will ever accuse Harvard of saying, oh, maybe Hamas has a point? Because I definitely, like, it is not Tarek Masoud's right
Mhm.
to subject Harvard to that. So
Mhm.
so I don't know the answer. It's the kind of thing I would have to think super hard
Yeah.
about. I would have to talk to people about. That is not a decision I feel like I could make on my own.
I wouldn't suggest that, but
Yeah.
but certainly that is an important player, right? And getting
Yeah.
that perspective, because I think, look, I personally think I would understand their perspective because I think it's kind of very narrow. It's very focused on a particular worldview from the 13th century, et cetera, et cetera. And it is,
Seventh,
I'm
but
sure
yeah.
it wound through with that, all kinds of anti-Semitism, but still an important part of the conversation. Anyhow,
Yeah. Look, I
so
mean, I will also say, sorry, not to interrupt you, but like
no, no, go ahead.
I hosted Brett Stevens, and Brett interviewed Hamas members back when he was a journalist for the Jerusalem Post. So there is you know, you know, if we want to study this conflict, we need to talk to the people who are engaged in this conflict.
Mhm.
But I do want to say, like, we also have an institutional responsibility, and so we
Yeah.
have to constantly be asking, is this worth it? And I think with Hamas, look, it's an armed group, it's a terrorist group, so I think I would come down on no. But let me find a scholar who can channel that view for us.
Mhm.
And maybe a scholar who's sympathetic, like Tarek Bakouni. There are people out there who
Yeah.
are, on the right side of the law, but sympathetic with that organization. I think as you and I are talking, that's where I'd end up. But would
Okay.
I, Tarek Masoud, the researcher, if I had an opportunity to have a conversation with the leader of Hamas
Yeah.
for a publication, would I do it? 1,000%.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think that's actually a good way to separate the issue. So we've been going on for a while. Look, you and I could probably talk for hours, but I think we're going to lose people. Let me kind of sort of maybe kind of move into so towards our end game here. Um,
If you want to ask me questions about the Middle East Initiative, which is the earnest little program that I run out of the Kennedy School and that needs all the moral and other support that people can offer, I would be happy to do that.
well, we can do that another time. But let's focus on free speech here and
Okay.
academic freedom.
Yeah.
And I personally would be fascinated by learning more about the initiative. Let's talk about the Middle East dialogues. And do you see that as a model for Harvard? Is this something that other departments, other schools can emulate, should emulate? What kind of are you getting? What kind of reactions are you getting from elsewhere within the Harvard community?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really want to emphasize is just how much support there has been, let's say, over the last 18 months for this kind of work. And in fact, there was a point where I wanted to stop doing it to go on to do other things. And I was encouraged by colleagues, and including colleagues in leadership, to keep doing it. And so I really do think that Harvard is much more, very much open to this kind of thing. Um,
Mhm.
you know, is the Middle East dialogues a model? I definitely don't think that we should be telling faculty that they have to do this. Not every faculty member has the interest or the particular set of traits or strengths to be a good convener of dialogues across differences. What I think the university should do and is doing is encouraging and supporting those of our flock who want to do this work. I'll note, for example, David Deming, the dean of the college. He
Mhm.
just started a podcast called The Context Window, in which he brings people with different views and he engages in real deep dialogue with them. That's beautiful. That's exactly what we want. The If I could hijack your question a little bit, like
Go ahead.
the
Feel free.
part of what I do that I really do feel
Mhm.
should be more of a model, or I hope that people will look at as a model, is the Middle East Initiative. So I've got this program that
Mhm.
has every week we have a research seminar, and at my table, Israelis, Palestinians, Saudis, Iranians, Emiratis, Turks, Americans, obviously, like the whole region. And the only rule, I mean, going back to this free and ordered space, the rule is we all talk to each other. It's like, because if we don't talk to each other, to use a metaphor that was shared with me by a colleague, if we don't talk to each other, that's like me saying, okay, John, you can be on the basketball team, but I'm not going to pass the ball to you. Like, no, you got to pass the ball to John. Okay. And so if I have somebody in my program who says, like, yeah, I don't talk with Israelis, you don't get to be in my program. Just like if I have somebody in my program who says, yeah, I don't talk to Palestinians, like, okay, my program isn't for you. Because around this table, we all recognize that we are in the collective enterprise of searching for solutions. And we can't do that by boycotting each other, not at the university. And so that, I like to talk about the Middle East initiative that I run as Harvard Center for Open Inquiry on the Middle East. And I would love it if more people, like if, for example, like we have serious problems in this country around race. Can we have a center for open inquiry around race relations where you get people from all sides of this thorny problem who have deeply different views about how to solve it, who nonetheless week in and week out have to come together in a collective enterprise of dialogue and problem solving and exploration. Like that's what the university can and should be. And I'm incredibly grateful that I get the opportunity to steward a small part of that when it comes to the Middle East.
So is that, and it just piques my interest here, but that's a seminar. That sounds like it's it's a seminar type program, right? It's people show up, it's presumably Chatham House rules or something like that, and you talk to each other and you get a better understanding of what's happening.
Yes and no. So the Middle East Initiative is a big program. We have multiple projects. And so I've got an Israel project. I'm incubating a Palestinian governance project. We have all these different pillars. We have a project that is comes out of the Emirates, a Kuwait-focused project, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have people who are fellows who are working on these projects. Okay, so it is a research center. But one of the core activities of this research center is this weekly convening that forces us all to come together and, discuss issues. So somebody will give a presentation. The presentations are not on milquetoast issues. And we bring our best, most genial, incisive, but friendly selves to that discussion week in and week out. And it's great. Yeah.
No, it sounds terrific. Though it's a great program. I mean, it sounds like it's a great exchange, a great way to meet people, understand different perspectives. What is ultimately the goal really just for people to network and get to know people outside of their comfort areas and gain different perspectives? Or is there some other objective that you're trying to achieve?
Yeah. Well, so that seminar is a research seminar. The point is we've got to produce research products. Okay. So one of our fellows is going to present, for example, on, Israeli-American relations. Okay. And he's going to give his theory of how this relationship has evolved. And then you're going to get all kinds of questions and pushback from this audience, and that should make your research better. So the point of this is not just to talk and have a good time. The point is also to demonstrate that by convening these different views, this diverse group of people, but then rigorously enforcing a rule, which is that we got to talk to each other. We got to pass the ball, that there are tremendous gains to be had from that in terms of the knowledge building enterprise.
So we've been going on for a long time. I think I'm going to try to you can whatever additional comments you want to make, you're welcome to make.
You asked me a question about the support from the administration.
Yes.
And I want to emphasize something, which is, when this whole thing started and, there was a statement when the Palestinian speaker came under scrutiny, there's a statement from my dean that, everybody characterized as the Kennedy School distancing itself from Masoud's thing. And I certainly felt that way. And, I've gone back and read the dean's statement. And, I really feel like I was totally unfair to that guy because, this is the comment that I made early on. Like, people, I understand people are navigating a really tough terrain here. So
Mm,
I now read his comment as the following, saying, look, Tarek has academic freedom. It's our job to uphold that academic freedom. And by the way, if you read the whole letter, they even go into, the diversity of perspectives that I've brought.
mm,
But because they led with Tarek's invited this person who has abhorrent views, it was very hard for anybody to read on.
mhm,
And I was particularly aggrieved because I was not consulted about that statement. And I thought, oh
mhm,
my God, people are going to think that Tarek Masoud, the Muslim professor, has those abhorrent views, and that's why he invited the person. But I think in the 2 years of doing this,
mhm,
I've really become much more attuned to the way in which I actually couldn't have done any of this
mhm,
without the cooperation of the administration, even when they were not super thrilled with this gift that Tarek is giving us. Like when
mhm.
we had Alan Dershowitz here, we had to have security. Okay, Alan was very concerned. This is in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder. Who organizes that security? Tarek Masoud is not organizing it. Tarek Masoud is not checking people's bags. It's
Mhm.
our administrators, our deans, and like it, the so I like the narrative of like, I was just given this award by Heterodox Academy for courage in convening these dialogues, and like
Congrats, congratulations.
yeah, I'm so profoundly grateful for it. But I like wince a little bit at this idea of like, which by the way, I've also like, I haven't, it's not like I haven't cultivated this idea, but like, it's not right of Tarek fighting all kinds of forces, including those within the university. If the university was not
Mhm,
fundamentally dedicated to open and rigorous inquiry, I wouldn't have been able to do it. And that's why I
mhm,
said at the outset, I actually like I'm optimistic about this place. I'm
mhm,
optimistic about Harvard. I'm optimistic about our students. I'm optimistic about our leadership. And you see it in how things are unfolding on campus. And so that if I can leave people with any message, it's really that don't believe our alumni should not believe the worst things they hear about Harvard from President Trump or anybody else. Like you have enough source of information about the university to get things from the horse's mouth, and things are better than they've been made out to be.
Okay. Well, look, I think that sounds like a perfect message to actually conclude on. So thank you very, very much. This has been fascinating. I think this has been terrific. I'm even more interested to actually follow the series. So I think this is great.
Well, when you come to Boston, please drop us a line, and we'll have you over at the Middle East Initiative.
I would. I'm actually. What days do you typically meet?
Well, we have that meeting on Wednesday, so you're
Yeah.
more than welcome.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, yeah. During
Well,
the
you may see
semester.
me.
Yeah.
So anyway,
All right.
I'm just
Done.
giving you warning.
I'm going to hold you to that. I'm going to hold you to that.
Okay. So look, I'm going to conclude today's program by thanking Tariq for taking the time to speak with us and to all of you for watching. I'd like to especially thank all of you who provide the financial support that we need to provide programming like this. I encourage each of you to watch the Middle East dialogues and at least check out the ones that have speakers that interest you the most. And although Tariq does a great job of trying to keep people honest, suggest that you watch at least two programs, with people with different views, diametrically opposed views. Please sign up for the Harvard Alumni for Free Speech newsletter and check out our website for other developments affecting Harvard and the Harvard community. And if you have any questions regarding Harvard Alumni for Free Speech, please reach out to me. And I guess to Tariq, if you want to have any questions about the Middle East dialogues or his Middle East initiative. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you,
Take care.
John. It was a real
Bye
pleasure.
bye.